Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Happy New Year to all of you. I'm Radwan Masmoudi. I'm the president of the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy. And it's my pleasure today to welcome all of you and an excellent panel of Egyptians and Egyptian experts to talk about the situation in Egypt and the future of democracy in Egypt. As we all know, today or this week marks exactly 6 years of the beginning of the Arab Spring. It was 6 years ago. It's been a tough 6 years for majority of these countries. Certainly Libya, Yemen, Egypt, and Syria have been going through very difficult times. But I think that we have learned many lessons and we continue to learn. And the first lesson is that dictatorships are not stable. We have seen how quickly they left and how quickly they fell down when the people came out in the streets by the millions in each of the capitals. So if we want stability and development in the region, we certainly will not have it by having dictatorships or oppressive regimes. The cause of extremism, the cause of violence is lack of opportunity, is lack of hope for the majority of young people in the region. That's why we need democracy, we need freedom, we need a sense of dignity for young people, we need a sense of hope for young people. And that's why the Arab revolutions happened 6 years ago, and that's why I think they will still happen again, because the problems or the underlying causes are still there in each of these countries. And that's one lesson that I hope we have learned, that we need democracy and we need to work for democracy. The other lesson that I think we learned, and we learned it both from Egypt and as well as from Tunisia, is that the only democracy that works is an inclusive democracy. There is not a single party that is capable of ruling Tunisia or Egypt or any of these countries. The only way we can build a real democracy if we all work together, if all the parties put aside their differences and work together to build a new system of government, a new democratic order that includes everybody and that has a sense of compromise. Nobody can force their opinion on others. Nobody can exclude the others from participating in the political process. So I hope that we have learned these lessons, but I am sure that people in the Arab world will continue to struggle and fight for freedom and for democracy. I hope it happens peacefully, because violence is certainly not the answer. As we also learned that violence always makes things worse, that these opposition movements or revolutions or demonstrations need to be peaceful, but that unless we solve these underlying problems and underlying causes, the situation in the region will continue to be very fragile and very unstable. So with these few introductory remarks, I'm very happy to welcome 4 well-known and respected experts on Egypt and the region. You have their biographies in the paper outside, so I will not read it, but Dr. Shadi Hamid is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Professor Sahar Aziz is professor of law and Middle East and legal studies at Rutgers University. Professor Dalia Fahmy is associate professor of political science at Long Island University, and Daanish Faruqi is currently a PhD candidate and a visiting scholar at the Center for Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University. He's a doctoral candidate at Duke University. So I think we will have a very interesting, and they recently published a book with the same title as we have chosen for today. So they will be presenting the results of their book, and then we will open it for discussions with the other panelists as well as with you. So let's start with Daanish. Try to keep it for 10 minutes each, so we have time for Q&A. And you can come here or speak there, whichever makes you more comfortable. Thank you.
Seeking active state intervention to properly cultivate the appropriate preconditions of liberal citizenship. And therein lies the contradiction, ladies and gentlemen. Adopting a philosophical worldview predicated on the sanctity of individual autonomy and a constraint on sovereign power, Egyptian liberalism has from its inception been a project wedded to a deeply powerful central state. The rise of Gamal Abdel Nasser in the 1950s owes much to this incestuous relationship between liberalism and the Egyptian central state, as liberals, flummoxed at their inability to implement their project through the parliamentary process, ultimately endorsed the rise of a left-wing reformist dictatorship, or al-mustabid al-adil, the just tyrant in Arabic, to emerge and forcibly create the conditions of liberal citizenship and civil society, single-handedly inaugurate the modernist reforms they sought, and then benevolently step aside. With Nasser and the Free Officers movement, the liberals got their just tyrant, who proved anything but temporary. This is all, of course, a redaction I offer here, spelled out in far more detail in our book, but I submit that the illiberal proclivities of Egyptian liberal activists post-2013, particularly their antagonism toward the Muslim Brotherhood, owes much to the equally contradictory inheritances from their ancestors in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And perhaps most surprisingly of all, this contradictory status posturing by Egyptian liberals ultimately makes them bedfellows with their arch nemesis. Despite liberalism presenting itself as a bulwark against the forces of Islamism and the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, I argue that the two movements are ultimately philosophically tied to the hip on this fundamental basis, in that both are deeply wedded to an ideological statism. Here I offer a more detailed reading of the Genealogies of Liberalism, which I've done my best to streamline here, and I juxtapose it with a very close reading of the political philosophy of the Muslim Brotherhood, namely key treatises by its founder Hassan al-Banna and its major intellectual architect Said Qutb. In so doing, I uncover that, like Egyptian liberalism, the Muslim Brotherhood project is one equally beset by contradictions, in effect offering a project of reform that requires the guiding hand of an all-powerful central state to forcibly create the conditions for a proper Islamic society. Under such auspices, needless to say, the state apparatus takes on an authoritarian character. Ultimately then, Egyptian liberals share far more in common with their avowed arch nemesis in the Brotherhood than they're willing to admit. And to bring this conversation full circle, offering this juxtaposition allows us to see more clearly that just like the Brotherhood, in light of its most recent failures, needs to fundamentally revisit the origins of its political project and its ultimate aims, so does the project of liberalism in Egypt. If Egyptian liberals expect their project to have any long-term viability, they need to similarly wrestle with its internal contradictions and contextualize it beyond its classical Protestant origins in Europe in a way that does justice to the imminent social and cultural realities of Egypt. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll end by offering a brief reading or a sentence from the end of my first chapter, in which I write, quote, "If Egypt and the contradictions of liberalism is to offer only one formative lasting critique, it is that the contradictions of the liberal experiment in Egypt can only be overcome by realigning the project to speak to the needs of the Egyptian people in a cultural, social, and yes, religious idiom that they find congruent." And with that, I'll end here, and I'll leave it to my colleagues to bring this conversation full circle. Thank you very much.